We are here today for a water quality outreach webinar that will cover improvements associated with the West Branch DuPage River corridor restoration improvements. These improvements include the extension of a flood control berm and multi-use path along River Road, the creation of floodwater storage, the realignment of the West Branch of the DuPage River, and associated river restoration. Water surface elevations were reduced through the area due to the re-meandering of the stream, a new Warrenville Road bridge structure, a dam removal, and the installation of several best management practices. This webinar will also discuss how these projects were accomplished in partnership with multiple agencies and funding partners. And just a quick special shout out to Jim Zay. Jim is our DuPage County Stormwater Management Committee Chairman, and I believe Jim is on our webinar this afternoon. But Jim was an integral part of obtaining grant funds for all of these restoration improvements. So thank you very much, Jim, for all that you've done for this project and our department. Again, this webinar, this is a free webinar. One PDH, one professional development hour will be made available for your participation. We have several of these workshops throughout the year. We find that these workshops are a great way to connect like-minded organizations and individuals who are concerned with the water quality of our lakes, rivers, and streams in and around DuPage County. These workshops are part of our public outreach and education programs and help us meet requirements outlined in our ILR 40 permit with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. This webinar is being recorded, so if you know of others that can't be with us today and might benefit from this information, we will provide a link to the recorded presentation shortly following the program. A couple more thank yous here. I'd like to thank Mary Mitros. Mary is our Stormwater Communications Supervisor, and she is running our program today. I'd also like to thank the Conservation Foundation. They are our partners for all of these workshops and webinars, specifically Jan Rail. Jan is the DuPage County Program Director for the foundation, and she helped line up our speaker for today's program. And speaking of our speaker, thank you to Jami Lock. Jami is one of our very own from our department, so thanks, Jami, for being here. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you again for joining us this afternoon. Just a couple other quick announcements here. Hopefully everyone is staying warm and healthy this winter. I believe we are over halfway through the winter, and hopefully we have made it through the worst of it. I also want to point out that we have Valentine's Day right around the corner. Make sure to remember your loved ones on Valentine's Day. I actually asked my wife what she wanted for Valentine's Day, and she said, "Chris, nothing would make me happier than diamond earrings." So nothing is exactly what she's going to get. We'll see how that goes. I'll keep you all updated. But right now, trying to tie all this together, trying to tie Valentine's Day and true love, and of course, our West Branch restoration project all together, I actually know someone who met their husband during the construction of a phase of this restoration project. And that someone is our very own Jami Lock, who is going to be giving the presentation today. Hopefully she included some photos from her wedding. That would be very nice, since I was not invited to the actual wedding ceremony several years ago. Anyway, that's not important right now. What is important is that we're going to learn about this awesome restoration project. But before I turn things over to Jami, I do want to remind everyone that you are muted. If you do have comments or questions during the presentation, please type those directly into the chat box, and we will relay those on to Jami at the end of her presentation. And one other reminder, remember, the audience, you guys are responsible for your own video cameras, so whether you want those on or off is completely up to you. All right, so let me say a couple more things about Jami. Jami is a senior project engineer for the DuPage County Stormwater Management Department. She is a graduate from the Michigan State University with a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering. She holds a professional engineering license in the state of Illinois and is also a certified floodplain manager. She has spent 15 years of her career working in water resources, focusing on both design and construction. All 15 years have involved some sort of work on the West Branch of the DuPage River, including an internship in 2005. For the past 9 years, she has worked for the DuPage County Stormwater Management Department. As one of the department's senior project engineers, Jami is responsible for oversight of the department's flood control projects, as well as the primary contact for the department's drainage program. And our staff feels very lucky to have her as part of our stormwater team. So Mary, please turn it over to Jami and she can get started.
I just unmuted myself. Thanks, Chris, for that wonderful introduction. Glad you didn't tell me about that beforehand. I guess I owe a lot to the West Branch. I should have named my kids West and Branch, huh?
There you go.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here, hopefully successfully. I think we should be in good shape.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, so again, I am Jami Lock. I'm a senior project engineer with the Stormwater Management Department. It's been about 9.5 years, and it's been a pleasure to continue to work with the group that we have, and also on the West Branch. As Chris said, I've spent all of my career basically in some way, shape, or form dealing with parts of the West Branch. So hopefully I don't screw this up too much because I should know this like the back of my hand. Okay. So I'm going to start out real quick with just a very brief introduction of the Stormwater Management Department. Who are we? For those who don't know, we were established in 1989. We are a county department that is guided by the Stormwater Management Planning Committee and Watershed and Stormwater Management Plan. We are responsible for a lot of things, one of which includes enforcement of the countywide stormwater management and floodplain ordinance. I wanted to also point out that we have 17 flood control facilities countywide, and they have a floodwater capacity of nearly 6 billion gallons. So altogether, our department does manage quite a bit of stormwater. As Chris has mentioned, and I mentioned briefly, we have several programs that are under the scope of Watershed Management Department. One of which is water management. The other is water quality. We have a floodplain mapping group, regulatory services group. We also focus on flood control operations and maintenance, hence why we have the 17 flood control facilities, and a shared services group. Chris mentioned the drainage division that is under shared services, where we try to emphasize. Where we try to emphasize the opportunity to work with multiple different agencies and share anything from equipment to our actual expertise to help with any type of let's say cleanup services for streams, in addition to helping with design or advice for helping localize drainage projects. So with that, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the West Branch Watershed. The West Branch Watershed is on essentially the western side of the county. You can see the nice picture there on the right. It's one of 3 major watersheds within DuPage County. It consists of about 127 square miles. There are about 27 municipalities that are somehow impacted by the West Branch watershed, and there are 17 tributaries that connect to it. Specifically to the watershed plan, again, as part of our watershed management group, we also try to focus on developing watershed plans that identify flood-prone areas and water quality improvements within that watershed. So that's what we did for the West Branch itself. We adopted the original plan in 2006, and then there was an addendum created and adopted in 2010 that was primarily in response to the 2008 storm event that we experienced. We also are focusing on developing water quality watershed plans for subwatersheds. We have successfully completed 3 of those, and we are working on securing funding to complete the remaining water quality plans for the remaining subwatershed areas. So I'm going to dive into what I'm calling the legacy projects along the West Branch. The reason I'm calling them legacy projects is because they were essentially one of the first couple of projects that started along the West Branch, and I think that they really spearheaded and provided opportunity for what was to come for several years later. I'm going to start out with the Kerr-McGee, the Superfund cleanup project. It's got a long history with it, but in a nutshell, initially in the early 1930s until the mid 1970s, there was a company called Lindsay Light and Chemical. They created lanterns, and as a byproduct of the lantern creations, they created this the thorium, and the thorium itself was again a byproduct of that. So now a known carcinogen and a particulate, meaning it stuck to soil and kind of stayed that way. So what happened throughout the years, as it was purchased by Kerr-McGee in the 1960s, it was spun off to another corporation called Tronex, and eventually became part of a trust. But what happened in the early years with Lindsay Light and Chemical and Kerr-McGee is this particulate, this soil now with the known carcinogen of thorium in it, transported, it was offered as free fill throughout residential sites, and then also made its way through storm sewers into the West Branch and Crest Creek. So there was a massive cleanup effort that it came out of this because the half-life of thorium is 14 billion years. It's insoluble, again, connected to the soil. It was not going to go anywhere unless we removed it. So that is exactly what we did. As part of the removal process, we took advantage of making this not only a thorium remediation project, but also a large-scale restoration project. After everything was cleaned up on the residential sites in the 1980s, where what we call the local communities, which consisted of 5 communities, spearheaded by DuPage County, also included West Chicago, Warrenville, a park district, and then also the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. So we all worked together with the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, the US EPA and IEMA, not only on the residential sites, but we fast forwarded then to the stream sites. So we ended up starting in 2004, where we began cleaning up what ended up being 7 miles of streams through the West Branch and Crest Creek. As you can see by the numbers, there was over 5 miles on the West Branch itself. And so we took all the material that we removed in these pod type sections. I've got some good pictures coming up. We removed all the material, and then we worked very closely with the remediation project to make sure that we could restore a large portion of Crest Creek and the West Branch, and kind of provide additional aesthetic quality and stream bank stabilization that the watershed really, really needed. A couple more quick facts on the remediation project itself. It started at the sewage treatment plant on the West Branch, ran down all the way to McDowell Grove. So from West Chicago all the way to Warrenville. Along the process, and you'll hear me talk about this throughout the presentation, we coordinated with 2 dam removals along the way. The full-scale cleanup activities took about 8 years to complete, again from 2004 till 2012. And there is actually still ongoing restoration efforts for 3 areas that were involved with the cleanup. Total overall cost was about $100 million to complete that. On the right is just a basic map to kind of show exactly the extent of the cleanup itself. So I feel like with all presentations, you really don't get a good idea until you see some good pictures. And so these 3 pictures really show kind of the extents and different elements of the cleanup project itself. On the far left is how we stored the material. The middle is how all the materials are removed and confirmed by survey points. And then most importantly, I think for this presentation, on the right shows exactly how these areas were segmented out and removed for the remedial process. So this is what we would call one of the pods. This is actually on the West Branch. You have an excavator sitting on a barge that is digging into an area, and that's the hazardous area where we're removing the material. Once that material was removed, that's when we took advantage of providing and implementing multiple different restoration strategies. So here what you're looking at on the far left is some heavy bank stabilization. We also have some in-river enhancements here, kind of on the top left of this picture here, of the far left picture. You can see that we have the start of a little bit of a riffle. There's some pools and some straight areas as well. And then we also have some in-river enhancements like a mushroom cap here that you see on the bottom right of this left picture. And that is essentially an inverted tree root that goes into there. So these provide some really good water quality benefits. It introduces some additional oxygen into the water. You've got the components from the tree that not only provide some shade, but as things kind of disintegrate in there, it kind of holds up some good materials and allows for the fish and other habitat to kind of eat off of that as well. In the middle picture here is what we would call, or what we kind of dubbed, the crenulated bank, where the bank just kind of undulates, and we have a rock toe pretty heavily armored there. And then you can see some native plantings directly next to that would be right directly in the floodplain area. And then translating over to the right-hand side picture, some additional good native plantings there as well. So next, I'm going to touch briefly on a couple of different NOAA projects. NOAA stands for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. DuPage County was able to receive about $10 million from NOAA for multiple projects. I'm going to talk about 2 of those today that really focused and tied into the cleanup project along the West Branch, and also a project that really gave back to the West Branch in kind of a different way than a stream bank restoration project. So to start with the Sanctuary Pond is located in the Blackwell Forest Preserve. It was kind of on the upstream limits, again, of that cleanup project. And what's really important with how this tied in was we were able to use this project for different components along the West Branch as well as the cleanup projected, and tie them together. We worked very closely with the Forest Preserve District on all of these projects. This was one of which we worked with them on, and it really offered an opportunity to incorporate, again, those cleanup strategies to really restoration, enhancement, and water quality strategies that we could implement throughout the West Branch. So the main focus of the Sanctuary Pond was to provide water quality benefits in addition to fish habitat, and then also, again, that stream bank stabilization and restoration. The far right picture is the area as it's being under construction. So we really look to provide the fish habitat by means of providing additional shade through some of the water quality features. And then as far as the water quality benefits, we wanted to try to install some plugs, native seed, things that would really replace the functions and values that were also impacted by the cleanup. So the next pictures here are kind of really good pictures to show what it looked like after the project was done. That big hole in the ground you just saw in the picture that was on the right in the last slide is now really a picture on the left that has turned into a really beautiful area within the Forest Preserve. So next up is the Urban Stream Research Center. This was also a NOAA project. It would cost about $1.7 million to construct. This was really a pilot project, essentially, that was a joint project between DuPage County and the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. It was located on a property that was once a Senecal Retreat Center in Warrenville off of Batavia Road. And the Forest Preserve saw this as really an opportunity to create a state-of-the-art facility, the only of its kind in Illinois, that would be for aquatic conservation programs and would really aid in a lot of really great things that would contribute back to the watershed as a whole. So one of the main goals of the Urban Stream Research Center was to augment common native freshwater mussels. They wanted to be able to propagate and reintroduce freshwater mussels into areas of the water of this watershed and others where they could also continue to monitor that. I wanted to point out that mussels are extremely important for the watershed and for the West Branch and other areas because of what they provide. They introduce additional fish, they encourage additional habitat. If you have better fish, then you get a better additional aquatic species. It really is, just a snowball effect for enhancing the water quality of these areas. So what the Forest Preserve also did, not only did they build this kind of with their bare hands to an extent as well, but they used the NOAA grant to also identify other important areas within the actual center itself and around, meaning like basically around the actual developed area. So on the picture here on the right, you can see that there's a wetland bottom basin that was constructed. They have rock outlet protection in areas. They've even gone so far as installing rain barrels on the actual facility itself. So it's a really cool facility that's actually not open to the public, but they're doing a lot of great things there as well. They also partner with multiple agencies, including educational institutes, to have it as a field research station. And they also have a volunteer program where they do some aquatic invasive species research. They really focus on the zebra mussel and provide education and outreach to prevent their spread. So again, that was a NOAA project that was funded. This photo credit all goes to the Forest Preserve. These are pictures of kind of the mussel propagation. Left is under a microscope itself. The middle is actually, you can kind of see the blue on the picture. That's a set of gloves from someone's hand holding all of these mussels. And then on the far right, you can see these mussels reintroduced back into their natural habitat. Okay, so enough of the legacy projects with NOAA and the cleanup. We're going to dive into the corridor restoration improvements along the West Branch that DuPage County was also heavily involved with. So I mentioned before that there were a couple of dam removals that took place on the river. I think Chris did as well in the introduction. That would be the Warrenville Grove Dam and the McDowell Grove Dam. I do want to mention, I do have the word removal in here, but they were really major modifications. They were both historic low-head dams, and pieces of those still exist today. If you go there today, they're really integrated into the outcroppings and other areas that were around where the dams were historically located. So again, they were two dams. They were both built around kind of the same time in the early 1900s, like the 1930s or so. They were really produced there, one specifically in Warrenville because they were associated with the mill race. Both of those projects identified as removal projects to really enhance the watershed in specifically the location of exactly the dam. And that's basically because from a water quality standpoint, low head dams, they create a lot of concerns. These lake-like conditions that these dams actually create, these little impoundments, they support high LGO biomass. They actually contribute to high water temperatures and also substandard dissolved oxygen levels. So partial removal of these dams really helped reintroduce a lot of good things to the river. It reoxygenates the river in these locations, and also provides for a better fish and mussel movement back and forth. They can't jump over the dam when it's there, especially those mussels. So as far as timelines and costs and grants and all that other good stuff that comes along with these two great projects, the total cost for the Warrenville Grove project was about 1.99, just under $2 million, and McDowell Grove was just under $1.5 million. Both of those were removed in conjunction with that cleanup project again, where we saw an opportunity to work together with the cleanup project and the Forest Preserve to get these done. In McDowell Grove, that one went first in 2008, but the cleanup had not been done yet. So that really kind of interesting aspect of that was we actually created a sheet pile dam upstream of the dam project itself. So we were able to eliminate the potential for any sediment to transport downstream that was contaminated from the cleanup. Also, the Warrenville Grove cleanup project was removed partially in 2009 when the Superfund cleanup was in that area. And then shortly after that, DuPage County and the Forest Preserve came in to prepare the remainder of the restoration and removal of those components. So again, here's some great pictures to kind of show and put some pictures into the words that I just tried to describe to you. This is the Warrenville Grove Dam project. On the top and on the far left, you can see the dam before it was modified. And then the other two pictures kind of show construction as it was modified. And then what was left of it. The middle picture is actually showing when part of it was dewater. There was a lot of bypass pumping and other components associated with the cleanup projects. So we were able to get some really good pictures for historical purposes as well of that. And again, the same thing for the McDowell Grove Dam. Okay, now going on to some of the other flood control and restoration projects that the county has been a part of. There was a series of flood control and restoration projects that took place along the West Branch following all these other things that I've been kind of going through and mentioning. The limits of all of these projects essentially started just upstream of Warrenville Road in Warrenville and extended all the way down to the McDowell Grove Forest Preserve in Naperville. So again, it kind of had that same limits almost with the cleanup project and restoration. We were able to tie a lot of really good components into. Total cost for all these projects ended up at $7.8 million, just under $8 million. Some were broken in different phases. We did different sections for them based on different permitting requirements, and again, to function with that cleanup project. I'm going to go into a little more detail on all of these, but just to kind of give all of them mention up front, we had the McDowell Grove planting project that took place. We worked on that berm improvement at Bauer Elementary School that was mentioned as part of a flood control project. And then we went into some heavy river restoration and flood control for a good chunk of the West Branch that extended basically from Warrenville Road down to Bauer Elementary School. That's along River Road if you're familiar with the area locally in Warrenville. So in addition to the phased approach and the flood control protection, we also were able to successfully introduce some compensatory storage along with some water quality components that really go hand in hand with the river restoration. Okay, diving a little bit deeper into the McDowell Grove planting project. That project itself, the scope was essentially to enhance the ecological system along the West Branch, primarily in the McDowell Grove Forest Preserve. We expanded on those restoration efforts by the Superfund project. And it was really a two-step process. The first process was we allowed the Superfund project to come in and do some stabilization for us while we worked closely with them. And then the county came in with the Forest Preserve in a joint project where we installed almost 90,000 plugs. There was about 55 acres of seed that were placed. And we had a very rigorous adaptive management plan where we really focused on making sure that vegetation met the standards, not only of the permit, but also met the mission of Stormwater Management Department and the Forest Preserve to make sure that it got where it needed to be. It was entirely funded by a DuPage County bond, and the project cost was about $800,000. I always like to try to add some fun facts into the presentations that I give. And so this one, specific to the actual cost of the project, the low bid came in at $777,777 So I think the bidders had a good time with that one. And here are some pictures, again, to go along with what I was just explaining. The far left picture, the very far left portion, hope you can see my pointer here. This is actually Ferry Creek. And so Ferry Creek actually comes in and confluences with the West Branch right in this location right here. Moving up on the right side of the picture, that is the West Branch DuPage River. So some of the cleanup, they actually worked on this peninsula that you can see in between and some of the rock stabilization, in addition to some of those in-stream enhancements. On the right-hand side, kind of in the middle of this left picture, you can see again those mushroom camps, which provide stream bank stabilization and fish habitat. And there's also a weir that was constructed here to try to encourage the water to stay kind of in the middle of the West Branch in that fallway, or that deepest portion of the West Branch itself. And then the far right, you can see a couple of other really good pictures that were taken during various phases of vegetation establishment. Overall, as a staff, I think we're really proud, really happy with how this whole area turned out. Okay, next up is some additional construction along the West Branch. So this is where we focused a little more heavy on some flood control improvements. And so these pictures here that you see on the right are really the devastating flooding that was experienced in especially 2008 from the Bauer Elementary School on the top, and then also some local pictures of some local areas in Warrenville where they were hit pretty hard by that. So as I mentioned kind of in the beginning of my presentation, we did have a watershed plan for the West Branch that was created in 2006 and adopted. The watershed plan addendum was adopted in 2010 by Stormwater Management Committee and DuPage County Board, and was really a response to that 2008 event. The preferred alternative here identified raising of the berm bed at Bauer Elementary School to provide further protection. It also included raising River Road in Warrenville, which would provide some flood control protection to additional properties in that location. There was corridor restoration improvement, and then even a bridge replacement that was recommended on Warrenville Road. Overall, the preferred alternative was estimated to protect obviously one school, multiple commercial properties, and hundreds of residential properties. So there were a lot of really good things proposed in this, and we were really excited to get started. So the first project that let me go to this here. Sorry. The first project that we were able to start to implement was the Bauer School Berm. The far left picture here, again, is of construction. You can see the school kind of in the background there. The berm was raised by 2 feet, which provided them additional flood protection that was really needed. They really took a big hit. It actually went into their school during the 2008 event. And of course, if you didn't suspect, you should have, that we coordinated with the Superfund project again on this. I love to show this picture on the far right. I've showed it in a couple different presentations I've given because the county's contractor literally had a line in the ground that defined the separation between the Superfund project and the county's project. So hand in hand, we worked together to protect this school the best we could. And here's a good picture to show that it actually served its purpose when it was put to the test. So we completed the Bauer Elementary levee project in April of 2013. About 2 weeks later, we had a flood event. So the almost $700,000 was more than worth it when we were able to protect the school from another devastating flood event. So next up are 2 additional projects that were constructed in 2013 and 2015. We called them kind of phases 2 and 3 amongst ourselves, but what they really focused on was the additional enhancement, flood control with compensatory storage. We ended up re-meandering the West Branch in this location underneath the Warrenville Road bridge that was reconstructed. The picture on the bottom of your screen is a caricature, I guess, of the bridge that was actually replaced by the Division of Transportation, DuPage Division of Transportation. And then the Stormwater Management Department with our contractor worked very closely in essentially the same footprint to make sure that that river got re-meandered. The top left, another kind of interesting fact was we were able to successfully secure and purchase and demolish a building that was right on the actual initial West Branch. And that is where the river runs through today. So we were able to do the re-meander, incorporate multiple bank restoration projects, some low-lying compensatory storage areas. We were able to actually construct a series of 2 paths that went along River Road and also under the new bridge, which provided something that we like to call co-benefits. I'll show some additional pictures of the co-benefits coming up, but we always like to provide multiple purposes and multiple benefits to any project that we do. So not only is flood control and water quality purposes important, we also want to make sure we're providing that aesthetic, the recreational components as well. So if we can provide a safe route to school, we definitely want to do that. Overall, we were successful in reducing flooding and enhancing water quality for a little over $6 million. It's about $3.5 million in 2013, and in 2015, a little under $3 million to complete these projects. Always want to mention that we can't make it possible without our funding partners. So we had the IEPA, the Illinois Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. We had the IDNR involved, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and then our department as well. I'd like to think had a really purposeful function of this entire project and all of these programs. We contributed some of our bond funds, as we mentioned. We also contributed a lot of staff time for project management and construction observation that allowed us to use these grant funds to go towards the meat of the projects, which was really the enhancements themselves. So here are some really good pictures, again, of the flood control, re-meander, and restoration projects that took place. A lot of them kind of speak for themselves, but you can see the riffles, you can see the banks, the native vegetation, and even the construction itself taking place on the far left, which was one of our really good compensatory storage areas that we were able to create. So another really interesting fact about a lot of these projects, starting from the cleanup and going all the way down through dam removals and restoration projects, is anywhere that we had to actually do some in-river work, we started with a fish and mussel relocation. So if we were bypassing the entire river by bypass pumping, we wanted to make sure we could remove successfully all of the habitat that we were able to. So we would take extensive efforts to go through with the forest preserve to make sure that we were successfully relocating mussels and fish throughout these areas. And these are some really good pictures from the forest preserve staff and others that were working together to make that possible. Here are some more pictures of the in-river enhancements. Top left is during construction, some of those deep pools and in-river substrate. You've got the weirs in the middle, some mushroom caps again on the right-hand side, and a riffle on the left bottom. I want to also make sure I had some really good pictures of some rain gardens and water quality improvements. We've got some pictures of wetlands here that you can see that were created in some of our compensatory storage areas. The far bottom left is a picture of a rain garden that was implemented as part of our 2015 project with the city of Warrenville. We worked very closely with them, and this is actually located and now maintained by the city of Warrenville as one of the best management practices in rain gardens that was implemented with our flood control, re-meander, and restoration project. Again, probably because I'm an engineer and I really like the construction stuff as well. Along with it, there's some really cool pictures, I think, of the the Warrenville Road bridge replacement project that was taking place on the far left. In the middle, you can see the actual portion, the excavator is basically sitting where that property was initially purchased and demolished, where you can see they're reintroducing and recreating, re-meandering that river. And then on the far right side, looking downstream to upstream, you can look underneath the new bridge and see some of the new features that were installed. It's a pretty fresh picture from when things were implemented. Some stream bank stabilization pictures again, just to focus again on that river restoration, the stream bank stabilization there. The middle-ish picture here, you can see my cursor, that focuses on some live stakes or live willow stakes that were put in the ground as a restoration measure. I think it's always really important to also point out some trials and tribulations and things that you go through and what you learn on projects. And I would say that the willow sticks along the West Branch in this location was one of them. We've used them successfully in other areas. I know a lot of people specify them in a lot of areas and they work really well. Here it did not work very well because I think primarily because possibly in part when they were installed, but also with the amount of velocities that the West Branch experienced in this area, they really never thrived and never provided the function that we were hoping for in this area. Okay, I did mention the word co-benefits and wanted to touch base on that again, just to emphasize the importance of that and show some real life pictures of what we've seen as far as co-benefits are concerned and what our department, stormwater management, aims for. We, on the far left here, you can see a picture of a path, and then you can see kind of what looks like stair steps on the right-hand side of the river. Those are stone outcroppings that were implemented to allow that recreational component of fishing, making access to the river a lot easier for the general public, while also preserving the native plantings that are around it. So we provided a path for them to access, opposed for them to create their own. And then that path there you see is the path that I mentioned that we constructed as part of our projects. It actually goes underneath Warrenville Road Bridge, and it provides another opportunity for recreation where it connects several paths throughout the areas for bicyclists, for example. The top far right picture is one of our water quality, and I would also consider it as an aesthetic co-benefit. This is a wetland area. You can see all the trees that are basically dead, like the tree snags that are in the middle there. That is super important as far as a co-benefit for additional habitat for additional creatures, right? So you got your snakes and your birds and your frogs and things that may not live like a fish does underwater, but they can definitely use that snag to their advantage as well, which also attracts additional wildlife. And then again, the far bottom pictures, they also show the paths as well. Really wanted to focus and emphasize on the far right bottom picture. We actually created some ADA accessible opportunities for people to get onto the newly created path, and this path itself directly connects to the Bauer Elementary School, so we could provide also a safe route to school for the kids in the area. So with all projects, we always have multi-jurisdictional projects that require a lot of agency coordination. Definitely wanted to mention in this presentation that we really appreciate and work very closely with the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County, also the city of Warrenville, city of Naperville, city of West Chicago, and the DuPage Division of Transportation. None of these projects are possible without intergovernmental cooperation, and that's really what is needed for every type of large-scale project that the Stormwater Management Department at DuPage County does. We also had to involve the school district and commercial and residential landowners extensively in a lot of our projects. A lot of times it's very difficult to involve so many stakeholders, but it's very important to make sure that we're meeting all the mission statements and goals and objectives of all these agencies and partners, including the residents and commercial property owners, to make our project a success. We always have intergovernmental agreements, easement negotiations going on. That dewatering coordination with the Forest Preserve was very necessary. And then also we had road closures to implement, and our project at the school had to take place in coordination and cooperation with the elementary school. They actually moved their summer school and made sure that it was not taking place at that school, so our project could be successful during the summer seasons. So lastly, I want to kind of end with a water quality wrap up. As I hope you have learned today through the presentation today, not only were we able to implement the flood control, but we really focused and tried very hard to make sure those physical stream improvements were implemented to provide a really good water quality component to all of our projects. It's always our focus to make sure, and I believe that we were very successful in having cleaner water, a more diverse fish and aquatic life and habitat throughout this entire stretch of the West Branch. We were able to impact positively. We are seeing high quality species in this area, reduce algae, and increases all the oxygen levels as well. Again, to mention and emphasize those co-benefits and recreation and aesthetics, also wildlife habitat. We're really happy to report that all of that has really been, all of our goals have really been met, and in some instances exceeded. So I wanted to also report that the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, they, I think, share the same opinion as us. In 2016, I want to make sure I find my notes here so I can get that right. They identified, the Illinois EPA found the West Branch to be fully supporting for aesthetic quality. So that's really good. We're really proud of that, and we're going to continue to aim to do additional things on there. We've done a lot, but there is definitely some more work that needs to be done. So if you're wondering what the next steps for DuPage County stormwater management involve, we always have existing projects that we're continuing to work on. I mentioned even with the cleanup itself in the very beginning, there's still 3 areas that need to be signed off on. So we're working on that. We still have a couple areas within these projects that I just went over for flood control purposes, where we're working on the water quality and vegetation components to make sure we receive permit sign off. We have these existing IGAs, particularly with the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County, that we do plan to turn over to them so they can continue to spearhead the efforts that we spearheaded and continue to maintain those areas the best they can in perpetuity. Our further initiatives, we are continuing to seek grant funding for not only ongoing projects, but also for additional water quality components. We're working on, we actually have an active grant application for additional subwatersheds in the West Branch to make sure we can continue to do those subwatershed water quality plans and the West Branch as a whole. And then of course, we're doing ongoing inspections, maintenance, and vegetation management for our projects, and especially properties that we own that have been impacted by the West Branch projects. So I just mentioned that we're looking for grant applications. We have an active grant application right now. We are continuing to coordinate with the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County to find additional potential project areas where we can implement a lot of other great things throughout the watershed. We are actively working in-house on some Winfield Creek stream bank stabilization, and also working closely on a Faywell Dam fish passage project that can provide, again, that better opportunity for the fish to go up and down a stream of where the dam is actually located. If you're wondering what you can do, if you've watched a lot of our other presentations, this is very similar. We want to continue to echo that you can do things as well to help our watershed and help better water quality throughout the whole West Branch and others. Please consider reducing fertilizer and pesticide use. Please pick up after your pet. You can definitely reduce your salt use. I know we're getting close to the end of winter, but we're not there yet. I myself am guilty of probably overusing salt sometimes, but really you only need about a coffee cup in order to get your entire driveway. So please focus on using reduced amount of salt. You can always mulch or compost your grass clipping and leaves instead of putting them on the curb. And please never dump into storm drains either. So speaking of storm drains and all these other things that you can do, DuPage County does sponsor many opportunities for groups to volunteer to help our watersheds and waterways. You can always participate in our Adopt a Stream that happens twice a year. We have an annual DuPage River sweep. And then we also have a stormwater medallion program where you can sign up and actually put those no dumping signs on the storm drains to discourage people from using them for intentions they shouldn't be used for. We also have seasonal events that take place, like the Thanksgiving cooking oil collection and pumpkin smash, and also the Sustainable Design Challenge. All of those we partner with for Scarce. The cooking oil collection is self-explanatory. Pumpkin smash takes place right after Halloween, and the Sustainable Design Challenge is an innovative green design challenge with high schools where they can sign up and share their designs that get voted on, and awards are given for the top presenters. Lastly, we love if you can continue to, or if you do already, or if you don't already, sign up for any of our social media platforms. You could sign up for our newsletter, as well as attend additional workshops such as these that we have coming. Always follow us on social media. We use various platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. We're always advertising all of the great things that we're doing in upcoming opportunities for webinars and how we're around the community. Also, if you're not aware, we do have a Citizen Reporter app. It is an app that can be used by residents and professionals alike. It can identify anything from stream bank erosion areas to stream blockages and water quality issues, and it reports the information in real time. So if you aren't using the app already, we encourage that you do. Once you become familiar with it, definitely tell all your friends and colleagues, because it helps us identify and pinpoint areas within the watershed that we may not be well aware of. So with that, again, I am Jami Lock. I thank you for tuning in today and listening. This is my contact information provided here. I think there's hopefully some time for questions that I think I'm going to turn it back to Chris to. But again, thank you so much for listening, and we're happy that you're here and happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point.
All right, great. Thank you, Jami. Great job. Very informative. There's a lot of information. You are a fast talker.
I'm sorry, I had.
No, it was perfect. It was great. We do have a couple questions that came in, and so let me read those to you, okay?
Sure.
Let's see here. So the first question was, Scott Meister from the Forest Preserve helped us with this one, but he said, the question was, are the mussels returned to the rivers surviving? And Scott said that Yes, that the Forest Preserve staff has monitored the release of the mussels, and they are surviving, growing, and likely reproducing. So that is very good news.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. That's right. Okay, I just lost my chat. Oh, hold on a second. Sorry. Just lost my chat box here. Okay. Let's see. The next question then was, did you remove sediment that accumulated behind the dams?
Great question. And so the answer to that is yes. And it was done in multi-parts because of that cleanup. So I mentioned with the McDowell Grove project, with that dam modification, we actually, I think I mentioned, we actually put a dam upstream of that. There was a sheet pile dam that was constructed upstream to keep any sediments from transporting during the cleanup. But then as part of the dam removal project itself, once it was safe to do so, the rest of the materials was removed. So McDowell was a little bit different than Warrenville in that McDowell right at the dam itself did not have any contaminated material. So that was removed, if any, with the actual removal of the dam. The Warrenville dam, that there was actually contaminated sediment right up to the dam itself. And so a lot of that was removed with the remedial efforts. And now it's at its final home in Utah somewhere. Clive, Utah, okay. Actually, I shouldn't say somewhere, Clive, Utah.
Clive, Utah, okay. Thank you. Thanks for that. Let me see, here's another question. Are any special methods used to limit erosion during the plant establishment period?
That's a good question as well. So if Sarah wants to chime in, she can later, but what I'll add to a lot of these, especially with along the West Branch, we experience a lot of really high velocities around here. So a lot of our methods that we implemented were bioengineered methods, and meaning that we had a stone toe at the base, and then we were able to plant in between those with a lot of plugs. There was not really a lot of seed placed right next to the stone toe. Of course, as like the floodplain limits extended out and those velocities start to dissipate, that's when we use some seed and blanket. But we used a lot of live plants, a lot of plugs to go in that area. And then we used goose grit on top of that to deter any type of animal from coming in and eating that, which would essentially prevent the roots from establishing and cause that erosion.
And just to add on that, Jami, real quickly, one of the things that worked out really well with all of these in-stream and in-river projects is that we had a lot of great soil that was in situ. And so rather than bringing soil in, which is more subject to sediment transport and erosion, we actually did the plugging and the seeding into the soil that was existing. And so we really didn't experience so much additional sediment transfer because that's what was already there.
All right, very good. Thank you. A couple more questions. Did you have to reroute the flow of Ferry Creek during construction? How was that done?
Okay, so I have to think, this is a long time ago, I feel like now. So for Ferry Creek, we actually did not reroute the actual creek itself. A lot of those in-river enhancements, actually I lied, I'm sorry. So for the cleanup itself, we did reroute that. And so a lot of the cleanup had to be rerouted. Some of the pictures you could see the actual bottom of the actual riverbed. Those were all done by plastic pipe. It was all HDPE pipe that was probably between 2 and 4 inches thick, and it was all fused together. And so we used an extensive series of rented pumps. In most cases, it was like 6 to 8 pumps. Ferry Creek was pumped at the same time as part of the West Branch was. And so that was all pumped together, and then it was discharged using an energy dissipation structure that was created in the West Branch at a downstream location where the pipes discharged. So we basically made our own above ground storm sewer, if that makes sense, where we pumped it through, and then we had a lot of baffle blocks and stone and things that we brought in that could be removed after construction to stop any erosion downstream due to the force coming out of the pipes.
Okay,
hopefully
thank
that
you.
answered the question.
Yeah. Let's see, here's a question that says, are any plans for improving flooding issues along Springbrook? Springbrook #1, I believe, is tributary to the West Branch. I know it is a tributary to the West Branch. As far as putting together a watershed plan, we don't have a watershed plan yet for Springbrook. We do have a hydraulic model that has been developed for Springbrook. And I know the Forest Preserve has been doing a lot of improvements on Springbrook as far as through the St. James Farm and through some of their other Forest Preserve areas. We don't have Springbrook scheduled for a watershed plan. We're just completing one of our watershed plans. This is on Wards Creek, which is in a different part of the county. But once that gets completed, we will be possibly studying Lacey Creek through an in-house work with our engineers. But we will keep that in mind for Springbrook. We can maybe revisit that in the next year or two and try to get a watershed plan done for Springbrook in the near future. Any questions on that, you can contact me, Chris Bonamy, and I'll try to get you more information about that if needed.
And in addition to that, Christopher,
Yep.
we are working with the Forest Preserve to continue on some of that stream stabilization and stream restoration along Springbrook. We're working on an IGA with the Forest Preserve to keep that going, to continue that, which providing that stream restoration and stabilization helps provide a template for the stream, which does combat the effects of flooding.
Yep, very good, thank you. Here's another question. Are there any publicly available documents on lessons learned from the West Branch stream bank restorations?
My book comes out next week. Sarah, Chris, if you guys know how to answer this better, I'm not aware of any actual publication that's talked about the lessons learned, but that's actually a very good idea because we've done a lot on the West Branch for sure.
And that's, you're absolutely right, Jamie. Luckily, we've had a similar team working on this project and many projects across the county, meaning the county staff and the Forest Preserve staff. And we have taken those lessons learned and implemented them into the next project and the next project. And so going further upstream, what we call the mega project or the West Branch wetland mitigation project, we were able to implement a lot of those lessons learned up in that area of Carroll Stream of the West Branch that was restored. And so we do take note of it. We're really, really lucky at the county and the Forest Preserve. As far as we've had the same group of staff that have been involved in many of these projects together. And from the county, we're lucky that we've had not only the same staff and the same engineering group working on it, but also the same leadership. We've had the same chairman throughout all of these projects. And so just that consistency has really helped all of us continue with these projects along the West Branch and keep them going and keep them strong.
All right, very good. We got time for a couple more questions here. I'm trying to find out where I left off. Okay, so at typical flow rates, what percentage of the West Branch is output from water treatment plants? I've heard East Branch is around about 1/3. Do you have information about that, Jamie? I don't know if Mary Beth knows.
I do not know.
So I can answer that a little bit, but I actually can't answer it in a metric. The West Branch is a really long stream. So at the headwaters, that's a higher percentage because of West Chicago discharging into there, as well as Springbrook or Spring Creek that has a lot of discharge from the treatment plants. But as we get further down and we collect areas like Ferry Creek and other tributaries that are basically runoff, that percentage does lessen. And so I don't know an exact percentage or fraction of that, but it does dissipate the treatment plant impact as you move downstream.
All right, very good, thank you. And then Kimberly, it looks like she has a question. I think she's talking about the Citizen Reporter app. Can you talk about that again real quick, Jamie? The Citizen Reporter app?
Yeah, so we have an actual app. It's called the DuPage County Citizen Reporter app that you can download from your handheld device. It works on an iPad, a tablet, any type of phone. And what you do is you go into that program, you get started, and let's say you're going for a hike along the West Branch and you see that there's a major stream blockage. You can pull up that app and you can just click through the app to let them know that you see a tree in the stream, and then that real-time reports back to our department, who monitors that regularly to make sure we can get staff and equipment or whatever necessary out there to evaluate and address it.
All right,
for
very
those-
good. Another
I think-
question.
Hang on, Chris, hang on. I think I saw it come through the chat as well, that you can click on the link and get it that way if you're having a hard time finding it.
Yes. All right, what are the strings that look like fishing line over some of the restoration areas?
Great question. Thank you. That was the goose grid that I actually used to explain or answer one of my questions. Another great question that came through. So that's what we put in and implement. It's just wooden stakes, that like survey stakes that you put in, and then it's literally string, and that goes above all of our fresh plantings. And what that does, it deters the goose and other birds or animals that would eat that for food, and allows us to keep that as vegetation for our projects, which is really important that it establishes for those components that we try to install with the project.
All right, very good. And then looks like we've got maybe one last question here. It says the county partnered with other agencies in stream bank restoration / stabilization projects at the bend in the river just south of Jefferson Avenue Bridge in Naperville. Over the years, the bank has overcome the jacks eroding close almost under the river walk. How does your agency revisit past projects and support needed improvements?
Do you want to answer that one, Sarah?
Sure, I'll take first stab at this. I don't think I was around when that project was completed, but many of our projects, when they are done, we have a long-term maintenance agreement with most of our assistant or our stakeholders. With this specific project, I'm not sure I don't have a lot of knowledge on what has happened to it since it was first completed, but I can certainly reach out to Bill Novak at the City of Naperville, who I see is also on this call, and maybe we can discuss possible solutions, or if they have a long-term plan or initiative that they're looking for in that area. We do always try to work with our communities, especially an area that is incorporated in a municipality or within a forest preserve, in that we don't want to go into someone's area, their municipality, and take over. We want to work with them and be an agreeable partner.
All right, very good. I don't see any. There was one other question looking for my contact information, probably about watershed planning efforts for some of the watersheds, but I typed my contact information. Best way is probably through email, chris.voname, VONNAHME @dupageco.org is my email. So that's in the chat box if you need that. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. We do have a couple minutes remaining. I know, Jami, I know you have a wonderful singing voice. I don't know if you wanted to sing maybe your alma mater song.
Cheeseburger in Paradise? Sarah likes
No.
that one.
No.
No? Okay. Maybe we'll hold off on that. Anyway, I think that's all we have time for. I don't see any other comments, questions, so I think we'll go ahead and end things here. Again, I just want to thank Jami one more time for this wonderful presentation and sharing her knowledge and experience with us. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. We hope you have enjoyed and learned a few things from this webinar. Please remember, Mary Mitros will email everybody with a link to the presentation, a recording of the webinar, and of course that PDH certificate. Our next webinar is scheduled for March 10th, and we will get you more information about that webinar shortly following this program. We'll get that to you in the very near future. So that's it. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.